the hammers that I inherited with these rough, heavy tails allowed me the ability to match the top of the bass with the bottom of the tenor in weight. That's hammer weight. And that means that in my weighoff, the inertia is essentially smooth as well as the upweight and the downweight. Now, it turns out that there are 30 keys that need balance hole treatment. Well, that's a third of the keys, and to leave that in there, some of them are getting, worse and worse. What about the other ones? The other ones all fit freely on their pins, but they don't have that back chucking as yet. So on the one hand, the keyboard's done kind of well. On the other hand, it's interesting. I mean, maybe this is the most traffic. These are the keys that the player used the most. Anyway, the process is fairly simple. Just wet each one. And in fact, after I've done these two, I'm going to pick up a whole bunch. Just go one to the next. There's no real magic here. Obviously, I don't want it dripping through into the bushing cloth, but apart from that, and also I don't really want a residue on the bottom of the key. I just want to make sure that the balance hole is well, particularly the front and the back of the balance hole. So with some keyboards, there's a problem of how deep the balance hole is, in the sense of inside there is a mortise, and the mortise goes through the key to a certain point, and then the balance hole goes through the other side, but the mortise doesn't. And the thickness of the wood down there is important to how well the key plays. And if it's too thin, it will wear too quickly and have one set of problems. And if it's too thick, it will pinch and have another influence. And friction in the balance hole, keys are very sensitive to it, and the weighoff is very sensitive to it. So you don't want the balance holes to be tight, but you don't want them to be loose. It's like bedding cheek blocks. You don't want the cheek block bearing down on the keyframe's guide pin so that it affects the soft pedal. But if you have a crown fit, you need to have that fit completed. And some of our work in that way is very exacting. We work to a tolerance in keyframe bedding, as in key fitting, to well under 1/1000th of an inch, which is a tolerance that if you're having something made by a machinist would be very expensive, and possibly they just refuse to do it because it's too exacting. But that is our work, and we do it most successfully, I think, by trial and error and go, no go. We decide what has too much play and what has too much bind, and as we get to be good at it, we can refine that to a very precise place. So we get any play that shows up as a bump is going to wear into an expanding hole, which then everything is unstable. The regulation is unstable as the key moves back and forth. Your leverage is changing as it goes from one place to the other place. And what we want is consistency and stability, predictability for the player, and fluidity, a lack of obstruction. We want the action to just disappear and the music to somehow magically go from player to listener with inspiration and no distractions. I took a break for the balance holes to dry out a bit, and as you can see, they look pretty dry from here, but I need to get on with my regulating, so I'm going to, with a heat gun, try and make sure that they actually are sufficiently dry. And the regulating I'm going to do is going to stress the holes a little bit. So there's definitely going to be another round. I want to get to that place where I do the final round of dealing with the back chucking at the far end of my regulating, so that the action is ready to install. Okay, that one is definitely quite damp still. Interesting. Yeah, more recently applied, because I started at that end. What I don't want to have to do is to ease these keys. That would be ridiculous. So probably they're going to be free enough to regulate with. If I just applied this to all the keys, there'd be a whole bunch that would need some kind of fitting. Now, if this was a young keyboard and I'm at the end of my regulation, sometimes there's a little bit of play that happens, particularly in a shorter keyboard, when you're lifting the key to put your punchings on for adjusting aftertouch by dip, and by putting on the key steps and taking them off, and taking punchings off, and for the sampling. All of that stresses the balance hole a little bit. I use, you always put this on the cool cycle before shutting it off so you don't burn out the engine. I use damp chaser additive, which is a terrific surfactant, and it, if anything, cleans what it touches. Does not seem to leave any residue that I can detect, but it does swell up the balance holes, healthy balance holes, and it won't swell them up to the point where they're tight on key pins. I apply the damp chaser additive and then put them on their pins, and they size to those pins, and they do not get to be too tight, but they do tighten up the ones that are too loose. And it's a good way to finish up the job, so that if they're a little bit loose, they will later on create, if they're a little loose later on, they'll become looser and looser, and you end up with this situation. So we want to do no harm, or do as little harm on the way to improving things as we can. And the damp chaser additive is a tool in my kit.